Hello guys, this is Anka and today we're going to talk about how some of the pieces on a chessboard moves. So you see at the starting position, there's 8 pawns that make up a wall in front of all the other pieces. And they're not that powerful and they're only worth 1 point, but they can protect other pieces. So they are pretty useful. So how the pawn moves is, it moves 1 square forward, 1 square forward. It cannot move sideways. It cannot do that. And it cannot move backwards. Pawn is the only piece in chess that cannot move backwards. And the pawn is pretty special in a lot of different ways. All the other pieces, they capture your opponent's pieces, how they walk or move, but the pawn doesn't. It doesn't capture like this. So basically, how it captures is it captures diagonally forward 1 square, 1 square diagonally forward, and so basically like this, and then you just take all the other pieces, and there you go. Alright, so, and a pawn can do a lot of special moves. For example, if you want the pawn haven't moved before, and you can make it jump 2 squares in a row. Just take the pawn as a soldier, and it has slept before the battle, so it has a lot of energy. So it can charge into the battle with 2 squares in a row. But then later on, it runs out of energy and it can only move 1 squares in a row. And you can also make the pawn look lazy and move it only 1 square. But a lot of people like to move it 2 squares. It really just depends on the position, whether you want to move 2 squares or 1 square. And it can also do a move called Ampassan, which is when your pawn is at the 5th rank, or if you're black, you're at the 4th rank. Okay, so basically your pawn is here, and your opponent moves his pawn 2 squares in a row. It's a lot of energy, and it moves 2 squares in a row, and right beside your pawn. And immediately after that, you can take it as if it only moved 1 square, and then you can take it like that. But if you move after it moves 2 squares, you move some random moves, and you cannot take it anymore because it is not immediately after it moves. So yeah, you can also capture it like this, and then the pawn is gone. That's a special move. It's called Ampassan. It's from French. And also, you may be wondering, if a pawn can only move forward and when it captures it also moves forward, then what happens if it gets to the end? Like this. I don't know what. Like this. Pawn journey, and then gets to the end. What happens now? Does it become useless? Well, it doesn't. So take the pawn as a soldier again, and it has experienced lots of battles and other stuff, and it reaches the end of the enemy's line, and then, it should get promoted into a better rank or something. And in chess you can do that. So when a pawn gets to your opponent's end zone, it can promote into any piece except the pawn and the king. So why it cannot promote to a pawn? Because a pawn promotes to a pawn is basically useless. And why cannot it promote to a king? Well, because a king is basically the thing you're trying to protect in chess, and you cannot have 2 lives in chess. That is against the rules. So you can promote to any of these pieces right here. The rook, the knight, the bishop, the queen. And most people like to promote to the queen because it is the most powerful piece in chess and it worth 9 points. But some people like to promote it to like in some positions you want to promote it to a knight because it can do some moves that the queen cannot do. So yeah, that's about the pawn. Alright, and now let's talk about the king, the old man, the king. So here we have the king. And, well, it is an old man. It carries a lot of treasure, all the gold, all the money of the world. And you're trying to protect him. And you also want to steal the other king's treasure so you can become even richer. And the other king wants to do the same, to steal your treasure. So you're trying to protect your king and attack your enemy's king. So basically how the king moves is, well, it's an old man and it carries a bunch of treasure, so it has to move super slowly. And, well, basically how it moves is that it moves 1 square to every direction. It can move in every direction, but only 1 square. It's not like the pawn where it can move 2 squares in a row when you haven't touched it, but it can only move 1 square, whatever is the case. Except when this special move called castling. So basically, if you haven't moved your king or the rooks, you'll end up in this position where you have like a king right here, a rook right here, and a rook right here. You may have some other pieces in the middle, but yeah, this is basically what the king and the rook's position are. The king can do this special move called castling, which is meant to protect your king. It often happens when there's like some pawns in front of the king or something. So the pawns can also protect the king. So basically what happens when you castle is the king moves 2 squares to the rook, and the rook jumps over him. The king moves 2 squares to the rook, and the rook jumps over him. And it also happens the same thing on the other side. The king jumps 2 squares to the rook, and the rook jumps over him. That happens in 1 move, which is kind of fast, and basically you can like protect your king really fast. So there's some restrictions to castling. So first of all, there cannot be pieces. Let's just take that you want to castle on the king side, and yeah. So the restrictions are there cannot be any pieces like blocking the king's path or the rook's path. Like it cannot be right here. So that's why you want to develop these pieces early so that you can castle and protect your king and then attack your enemy's king. And you also cannot be in check. So basically what that means is that there cannot be any opponent's pieces attacking you if you want to castle. If there is, then you cannot castle. And there also cannot be any your opponent's pieces attacking the squares that your king is going to move to. For like these 2 squares if you want to castle king side, and these 2 squares if you want to castle queen side. And yeah, and also the king and the rook you want to castle to cannot be moved before you castle. Okay, for example, like this rook move, you can still castle. But if this king, like for example, it'll go on a little journey and it goes back to the same position, but it still cannot castle because it has moved before. So yeah, that is the restriction about castle and the castling. So yeah, here we have talk about the pawn and the king. So let's review about them really quickly. So the pawn can move 2 squares in a row at the first move, but then after that it can only move 1 square forward. When it reaches the end, it can promote into any of these pieces right here. The queen, the rook, the bishop, and the knight. And the pawn can do a special move called Ampassan when your opponent's pawn moves 2 squares in a row, and then immediately after that, you can just take that your opponent's pawn only move 1 square in a row, and then you just capture it. And the pawn, and the pawn, that's about the pawn, yeah. Okay, and then the king. It can move 1 square, one square to every direction, but only 1 square since he is slow. And it can do this castling move where the king moves toward this rook 2 squares, and then the rook jumps over him. And there cannot be any pieces checking it, it cannot be any pieces attacking these 2 squares, and there cannot be any pieces blocking these 2 squares. So yeah, that is all about the king and the pawn. And see you in the next video.